All right, here on the eve of training camp, Michael Russo jumping in to help us fill in some of the gaps here. Mike, let's just jump right in. For you, we've been talking all off season about different storylines that we expect to develop, things that we want to see once training camp hits, once we get into preseason and regular season. What's the biggest unanswered question for you that you're going to be eyeing up going into training camp here?
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe wrote it in. I think that was his big question in today's John Hines Q&A. I'm curious on how the three goalie system is going to work, because I think there's no doubt that their plan, since they couldn't trade Philip Gustafson this offseason, is that they're going to try to get Jesper Wallstedt some games this season, and to do that, normally that wouldn't be such a big issue, but there's two big things to me that are going to be, in my mind, problematic. Is one, his development. You don't want him just up here sitting around. I know that they're going to say, well, he's getting a lot of practices with Fleury and Gustafson. He's working with Freddie Shabbat. But I think the most important thing for a young 22-year-old is getting reps. And so if he's up here, backing up or in the press box at times, I just think it would probably be more beneficial for him getting starts in Iowa. And the other big reason is the dirty secret that every fan knows is their cap space. He makes $925 as a cap hit, so he's on the team, and they can't even afford another extra player. So there's going to be times where even if they want him up here, if they lose a forward, they're gonna have to send him down just to be able to afford a recalled forward. And so when they go on long road trips, I think that's an interesting thing. Like they got a 7-game road trip starting game 3 of the season. 5 of that is really one trip. And they're going to want him on that trip, because that's part of it is going to Florida and being a bonding trip. But if all of a sudden, if like last year where they lost Freddie Gaudreau and Matt Boldy in game 2 of the season in Toronto, if you lose a player, in Winnipeg or St. Louis, those games, you're going to need to send him back to be able to afford it. So I'm just going to be really interested. And I get it. They want him to get him games. He is the future. It's time to get him games. But when they made the decision to re-sign Marc-Andre Fleury, and the second they did that, you knew they were going to try to trade Gustafson. But even at the time, Joe and I talked about it, we knew it wasn't going to be easy to trade Gus. One, he was in the middle of a bad year, and two, there were a ton of goalies available this offseason and not enough teams. So it didn't shock either of us at all that they couldn't trade Gus. I think they did come close with Columbus in the Patrick Laine trade. I think that was agreed to. I think he was going there, and Patrick wouldn't waive his no trade to come here. But obviously it didn't happen. So what that means is that all year long, we're going to have to see if they're going to either trade Gus again, or if he gets off to a brilliant start, they're not going to want to trade Gus. So I think the three goalie system is, to me, the most intriguing thing.
And I think, like, talked to John Hines the other day, and like what struck me is he didn't say, "Oh, Wallstedt will play just a few games." He's like, he'll expect to push those guys, and whoever plays the best or competing the best will get a chance to play. And so, I still think Fleury and Gustafson have the edge in terms of playing more games, but I think they're give him a serious look. If they're going to play this game where they're going to have him on the third goalie, they're not going to want him sitting on the bench. So they're going to give him a serious chance to say, "Hey, they want to be more comfortable with him, so you can trade Gustafson in the middle of the year."
Yeah, and to your point, Joe, like, it's going to be really fascinating how they work this. Like, technically, like, if I'm the Wild right now, and I know, I mean, let's be honest, right? Gus is playing game 1, Fleury's playing game 2. I think that's likely. So to me, if I'm the Wild, I start Gus in the minors those first 2 games. And now you're saving, Wallstedt. Yeah. You start in Wallstedt. This is going to be the most annoying thing this year, is for me to keep my mind on which goalie I'm talking about. But they're going to, you start him in the minors because there's no reason to waste cap space there. And actually, let's be honest, they're like basically about $20,000 short of being able to afford 2 extra players. So if you do that, you actually could maybe accrue some space. Then what you do is now you go to Winnipeg on the second of a back-to-back, and then St. Louis. Like, maybe you don't take Fleury on that trip. Then you call up Wallstedt, you make him the backup in Winnipeg for game 3, and you make his season debut in St. Louis in game 4. And then most likely, maybe you send him back. You bring Gus and Fleury to just Columbus, save a little more cap space. And then you bring Wallstedt down to Florida, Philly, Tampa and Pittsburgh. And now you're at least having with the team bonding. He starts maybe one of those. So there's going to be ways to do it. But again, the wear and tear, I know he's only 22 and it's not trust me, we do it. me, I'm the most out of shape person in the world, and I could travel commercial. But he is going to get a lot of airline miles this year, because if you do it that way, you're starting him in the minors, you're bringing him up, then you're sending him back, then you're flying him to Florida. I mean, it's just going to be fascinating how they do it. So I don't know. It's going to be pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah. And going off of that too, Mike, like a lot of questions that came through are about, potential for prospects to make the team. Like, I'm sure that the salary cap's going to have big implications on that, but do you see anyone besides Huznadinov, Ohgren, and Height that are going to be making pushes for spots in the roster?
I mean, Scott, a lot of it has to do with obviously injuries, right? I mean, if they do have some guys that you lose in camp, I think guys like Reese Johnson has a chance. If you need a defenseman, Damon Hunt is close. That's the one thing that I do like about their offseason is they signed a lot of like really quality minor league players that are going to be down in Iowa that you could call up in roster spots. And, if you need them. So like a Johnson is somebody that's been a lot in the NHL, a Devin Shore, people like that. So there are those type of players. I'd love to see Michael Milne at some point get a chance this year. Hunter Haight's going to obviously play in the minors. He's probably not going to make the team right away, but it's going to be interesting because if they want to keep, if Riley Height proves that he deserves to be here again, cap space is not infinite. And so, again, maybe you keep him the first couple games, you send Wallstedt down. Now you could afford him, but then if you call Wallstedt up, you can't even afford Height. So it's going to be interesting. So, as John Hines is pretty, I think transparent about in Joe's piece today, they're not insulting anybody's intelligence here, and that's always like, I've covered the league 30 years. You always hear these teams like, oh, it's wide open. Anybody can come to camp. No, it's not. I mean, contracts rule the roost. And so, I feel bad for some of these prospects and minor leaguers that are coming to camp this year because they look at the numbers and they know that there's just no spots available. So I think Ohgren and Huznadinov deserve to be here, but they still got to make the team. And I hope they do.
Speaking of Reese Johnson in a kind of weird way, the season kind of started off on a rough foot last year when Jared Spurgeon, the captain, got hurt last preseason game. That made a big impact on penalty kill, made a big impact on defense. They had pushed Faber. If Faber didn't have that year he had, been an even worse season. So I know you sat down with Jared Spurgeon recently, an interesting, fascinating interview with him and his wife. And just what are the biggest things you learned, most fun things you learned too from that?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why I'm smiling, Joe. And I don't know when this pod is coming out, so I hesitate to scoop myself, but I got a big Spurgeon story coming out in Thursday's Athletic. And one of the most hilarious things his wife told me is that, and this just shows you what a great captain that Jared Spurgeon is and what a great captain's wife, Danny Spurgeon, is. Like, they do this stuff all the time and we never usually hear about it. Last week, they wanted to get all the two-way guys out of the hotel because they're going to be in a hotel for a month. So they made it an open invitation where some actual NHL guys did come as well. But, it's before the season. They got kids, families. A lot of them didn't come. But all the two-way players, the minor league guys, the guys expected to be in Iowa, the prospects came to their house for dinner. They were told to be there at 4:00. And at the end of the night, when they were all left, Danny Spurgeon goes to Jared, I really loved Reese Johnson and his wife. And Jared's like, that's the guy that hurt me in training camp last year. And Danny had no clue. And I just thought that was hilarious because that is the person that hurt his shoulder and he missed the first month of the season. But it's just, I think it says, this is the type of stuff that kind of drives me. I get it, but it kind of drives me nuts when fans are like, why don't they put the C on Kaprizov, give it to this guy, that guy. Like, Spurgeon's the captain of this team. He does a lot of stuff that we do not see. There's no reason. This is not a Toronto situation where it was just time for Tavares to give it up and give it to the 70 goal scorer in Austin Matthews. Jared Spurgeon should be the captain of this team. He is the captain of this team. Let's see what he does this year. And to your point, Joe, I think we all, just because maybe he missed so much time last year and it happened before camp started where he had his first injury, even though it technically was unrelated to the other injuries that cost him the season. We all take for granted of what a huge loss that was for this team. And look, he's obviously not the same player he once was at 34 years old that he was when he made his NHL debut on his 21st birthday. But this is a great hockey player that his impact was felt last year from an even strength standpoint, a power play standpoint, and obviously a penalty kill standpoint. Now, there were some bright spots because of it. Like we might not have seen Brock Faber excel to the point that we all knew that he could be if Jared Spurgeon is in the lineup. But you know, now that Jared's back, it gets Jake Middleton with somebody that he's much more comfortable with and plays better with. And then obviously you got Brodin and Faber together. So I think it's a huge return. I talked to Spurge, as he said the other day, he is feeling 100%. Obviously you don't know until you know, but he is feeling great right now. And so, you know, him being back, Foligno being back, and all the other guys, you know, the Goudreaus, the Zuccarellos that had, you know, that were nicked up for a lot of the year, just to have them healthy is going to be big for this team.
And one of the things you mentioned there, Mike, is one of the bigger things I'm looking for going into the year. Do you sense that it's an open competition right now for who's going to quarterback the first power play unit, or do you have a leaning on how that's going to wrap out?
Yeah, I mean, just reading again Joe's piece today, he talked to John, and John basically made it sound like there's going to be this open competition between Faber and Chisholm to decide who's going to be on that number one unit, and that they're both going to get spotted, and whoever's not on the number one gets the number two. Chisholm was great at times last year on the number one unit. I still would love Faber there, but I also think that Faber got worn down. Now, obviously, he had the ribs injury, so I mean, it's hard to say that he got worn down. But his game, obviously, as the season went on, I think the major minutes really started to, you know, really have an impact on him. Plus the fact that he was playing with broken ribs for 2 months. But you know, if you put him on the number two unit, that really, now you take a third defense pairing guy and Chisholm, you giving him significant minutes on the number one unit. We all know, watching the Wild, that on their number one unit, they either score or they play a minute and a half. It lowers Faber's ice time, where maybe he could be better on the penalty kill, which is the one area where he struggled last year. And so now if you're taking his ice time from averaging 26 and a half minutes to 24 and a half minutes, by playing him on the number two unit, it actually might make his overall game much more consistent. And so that would be the way that I think that they're going to come out of camp, but we'll see. But the one thing that I thought was pretty interesting in Joe's piece today is it sure sounds like it is just Chisholm and Faber. It's going to be, you know, one on the top unit, one on the other unit, and that Spurgeon probably will be a power play guy only if there's an injury or there's an ice time issue or something's going on in the game, which also could be good, because now Spurgeon can really think about just even strength and really making their penalty kill better. So as much as I usually like Spurgeon on the power play, I think he's a really good power play guy, especially getting the puck up the ice and shooting pucks from that right circle. It probably would be better for the team if you just rely on those two defensemen and have four forwards on each of the units.
And you look at Faber, you know, he couldn't have done a better rookie year. I know he didn't win the Calder Trophy, but it's beyond expectations. He's gotten paid now. He's here long-term. You were with him in Vegas for the NHL Player Tour, and talked to a bunch of guys too about like the quote-unquote sophomore slump we've written about a million times. Yeah. I don't know if it's real or not, but I guess coming up a guy who played 82 games, including with broken ribs. I'm curious what his thoughts are going into the season. What do you expect from him? If there's guys that have insight on, like, should we expect maybe not to have the same year because of just adjustments from their teams make too?
Well, yeah, I'm going to be doing a big story on that at some point in training camp. And I talked to Nathan McKinnon about it. I talked to Quinn Hughes about it. Both obviously had unbelievable rookie years. And I talked to Connor Bedard about it, who obviously we all know won the rookie of the year. And, you know, McKinnon is the one guy there, and Ashley Hughes, that did have sort of, you know, lapses in their second season. And the one thing that McKinnon definitely told me is that, you know, you almost lose your fear factor in year two. You know, the first year, first of all, nobody knows you, even though everybody knew Nathan McKinnon. But, you know, like, you know, you go into that year and you're always, every single game, almost fearful to look stupid. And so, you know, now when you have that great first year, you come in the second year and you kind of take your foot off the gas. And he's like, you can't do that. And that's why he thinks a lot of players do take that dip. And Quinn kind of had that too. You know, we'll see what happens with Faber and Bedard. But Faber has a really good mentality about it. You know, he thinks a lot of it is stats. And he just thinks that even if his stats come down, which again, if he's not on the top power play unit, it's probably going to invariably come down. You know, that as long as you keep that out of your head, and as his standpoint realizes that there's so many other ways that he specifically can impact the game, you know, he thinks that he's going to avoid the quote unquote sophomore slump. So obviously we'll see, but you and I both know him very well. He's an incredibly mature kid. He's built like a tank. And he's just got this great mentality about him. So I'm really not worried about him at all. I just think that we all, if his numbers come down based on the fact that he is getting now less ice time, because obviously if Spurgeon is healthy, you're now going to even out your first and second pair ice time. And then having Chisholm and Bogosian on your third pair, they're much better set than they were going into last season. You're going to lower the ice time. That's going to probably take away some of his offensive numbers. So as long as we all keep that out of our head and stop thinking that maybe he's having a worse year, I think that we'll all be fine with him. But the one thing I'll tell you about Faber in Vegas, Joe, is, man, was he in his element. And I joked on my podcast the other day with LaPanta that bad news for Faber, because probably every city he goes to this year, every NHL writer or broadcasters could be like, ask Sickman and Dylan and Jackson, hey, can I talk to Faber today? Because his personality just shone out there. He was so humbled to be there. First of all, amongst all these NHL stars, the Dreisaitl's, the Forsbergs, the McDavids, the Crosbys, and all that, to be part of that, I think he was super excited. And he talked about that. But everybody I talked to, not just the writers I was with, but the Elliot Friedmans, the Johnny Lazaruses, a lot of different people out there were all like, this guy came there and just was almost, inspiring the way that he dealt with them, talked to him, and how excited he was to be there. And, he wore his glasses and a lot of the pitch on ice stuff, mostly because he forgot his contacts, he said. But it was he just got into it. And I just think that says a lot about him, because, a lot of these players, they don't want to come. A lot of guys, let's be honest, Cole Perfetti was there for Winnipeg. Why? Probably because some guys in Winnipeg didn't want to go out there. I mean, some players just don't want to be there. And he just really embraced it.
Nice. And I know we already had you do a Waggle Golf Foursome with us before, but we'll pivot it and say, give us the 4 players, so not storylines necessarily, but players you're most interested in following going into the first day of training camp.
I mean, a lot of it, not to keep on returning to Joe's story today, but I really do want to see some of these. I mean, I want to see some of these guys that struggled last year or didn't have the greatest years. I know Joe's doing a big story on Ryan Hartman next week. I think it's probably a little overblown how we keep on lumping him in as like a bad season. He still had 21 goals on a team that didn't score a ton. But I want to see how he looks. I want to see how Foligno looks. I want to see how Spurgeon looks. I want to see how Freddie Gaudreau looks. Is Freddie going to be able to handle this, potential bounce back year if he's fourth line right wing? How's he going to produce? Where's Marcus Johansson in this lineup? And then, from the next step, the next tier, I want to see Huznadinov and Ohgren show that they are studs. We just saw him for little sample sizes last year. I'm really excited about Ohgren. And my hope as a beat writer is we get to see Ohgren get that real elevated role in the lineup this year, potentially on that second line. Marco Rossi's another one. If it is Hartman on top line and Eriksson Ek on the second line, Rossi is going to be your quote unquote checking line center. And again, how's he going to handle that? So it'll be fascinating to watch.
You mentioned Freddie, does he handle a fourth line role? Where's Marcus Johansson go? If you end up putting Ohgren a second line and the third line is Foligno, obviously, and then Marco Rossi, your third line winger is either Trennan or Johansson probably, or Trennan's on the fourth line. So he's a guy, I think, obviously, if he has a contract year, he's had contract years in his past, he'll be really good. But I guess how would you handle him in camp, or would you give Ohgren a chance to get that spot, or do you let him as a veteran player get that spot and let's see if he keeps on to it?
Well, as John said to you, I think they're going to experiment with a lot of things. So the one thing I caution Wild fans is that when we're tweeting out the lines in this camp, calm down, man. I can't handle it if you just go freaking crazy on a instant, this is the lines today. But if I had to guess, I think John starts with Johansson on line 2, because I also think that you don't want to immediately on a veteran just have him dejected on day one and be like, why am I on the fourth line? Let Ohgren work his way up. He is still a young kid that has to prove himself. He scored against San Jose last year. Good for you. It's still San Jose. You gotta elevate, and there's going to be times where Ogren's going to get that chance, and that's going to be the really interesting part of camp. But I think that if I was the coach, and maybe this is just the guy that's been around for as long as I have, and know how coaches think, like I think you start with the veteran in that really top spot, and then you let the young guys sort of work their way up. I know fans don't love to hear that. They just want Rossi on line 1. They want Ohgren on line 2. They want Boldy, Erickson, that type of stuff. But my gut says is that to keep, to your point, Johansson's like mentality in a good space, I think you start them there, and then you work it in camp and see who slots well with who.
Awesome.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, like it's you have some stories coming up on Spurgeon, which will be the day after this podcast comes out on Wednesday, and I have Hartman coming up, and you'll be at camp, obviously covering everything going on for us at the Athletic. But you have a show coming up too, don't you? You have a live podcast.
Right?
Yeah, Thursday at Tuttle's at 7 p.m. LaPanta and I are going to be out there with Stefan Veyu, who I just wrote about in the Athletic. It's going to be 2 days. Actually, today I should actually check in with Veyu to see how his he was getting his big CT scan today to see how the halo on his head was working, and essentially if there was bone growth in the C1 vertebrae that he broke, and if not, he's going to probably be in that halo for many more months, because they're going to want to try to do at all costs avoid surgery that would immobilize his neck. But he'll be out there in a couple days. 7 p.m. at Tuttle's, LaPanta and me. It's called Worst Seats in the House on the Talk North. And then, as you said, I got a ton of stuff coming out Thursday. I got a really cool NHL player poll coming out in the Athletic, where I talked to all the guys in Prague and all the guys in Vegas for this player poll. That's always fun. And then I got the Jared Spurgeon story. I'm also writing a Thomas Hertl story for Thursday as well. His first full season with the Vegas Golden Knights. So I'll be doing a lot of national stuff too, as well as the Wild.
Awesome. Well, appreciate having you on this week of training camp. We'll get busy for everyone, especially you. So thanks again, and we'll do this again maybe next month or something.
Yep. See you, Joe. See you, Scott.